0, 1.
Let's get started.
Then we got our second target right there. And now it's just a matter of are we going to get our last target? So there is a... All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you my exact S&P 500 game plan for tomorrow's market session on October the 8th, okay? Make sure you stay tuned to the very end so you can see a trade recap that I've taken this week. And ultimately, if you want to see how today's session went live, I've dropped the video underneath the live stream format on the YouTube page so you can see this morning's live stream, okay? Now, with that being said, let me get my big face out of the way so we can talk about the charts here now on display. So we're going to start off by talking at the cash market, and then we'll finish talking on the futures chart, okay? Now, when taking a look at what we have here on the cash market chart, I think it's important to note that we are in a situation that we basically talked about yesterday, okay? We mentioned the fact that we were bullish coming up, and that we were looking for this next higher high to perform, and then for us to actually perform a new higher high before coming back down to these levels of support, okay? Now, the levels of support are going to be mentioned at the 668, 667 and a quarter, as well as the low, which is 663. So anywhere, generally speaking, in those three key lines of support, we should see the market try to reverse, okay? So we'll keep this fuchsia bar up here just for the nuance of it, but we will update it in just a second, all right? We'll get rid of that, and we'll also keep this red case scenario because it is important. Now, what we're looking at overall is the fact that we are at the base of a range, okay? So theoretically, at this point, we should rotate back up to the upside, just like that in the fuchsia line. So the very first variation that we need to be aware of for tomorrow is the fact that we could find ourselves from right here, actually, rotating back up to the high. Okay, now that would be a direct move going higher, and which you're going to try to have to get in as we progressively go up and get in underneath a prior low. That's a bit difficult, which is why this one is a little bit less favorable in terms of trading it immediately tomorrow. Okay, however, once we do make ourselves and our way back up to the prior high of this range, we can basically just again look to short the market or wait to see if it does actually break out. Okay, so this kind of leads me into the second and third variation. Now, the second variation is a continuation of the bullish move, which you should see a pretty prominent breakout to the upside. It should be obvious, okay? Now, that obvious breakout will look for a pullback and a retest of the high. So that's basically how you would handle if we do break out. Now, I find this to be far more attractive than this trade right here. So just be aware that if you are trying to be bullish in this circumstance, I would look to actually buy the breakout versus buying in the middle of a range, okay? Now, like we mentioned earlier on, there is a high chance that we actually reject and go back into the range. I would suspect that before actually we find ourselves breaking out. So just be aware that I would expect us to find rotation to come back down into the range first. And that should look like some sort of variation like so, in which we do fail off that high and essentially just kind of rotate back down to these lows. Okay, again, the same level of support is going to be those 666 levels that we mentioned earlier. So let's label this as kind of the bearish path, although it's not immediately bearish. It is bearish in the shorter term, okay? Now, once we do get down to these levels in this scenario right here, we would be expecting a bounce to go back up to the prior high to keep this range rotation intact. So once we do get down to 667, 666, again, expect the market to continue its movement going back up to the upside. Now, in this particular situation, we would have to be aware of that if we do break down considerably, much like the other case, the bull case scenario, we would then look for that cascading effect. Now, this comes in a multitude of different variations, so don't use this just as verbatim. But essentially, from that position, we would now like and look to sell the market because at that particular point, the market is, again, shorter term bearish, okay? So these are going to be the primary paths you need to be aware of for tomorrow, although we do need to talk about one more variation because we are stuck down at this low, okay? Now, everything that I mentioned so far kind of warrants the fact that we do rotate back up immediately going higher. Now, what I'm about to mention now are the alternative pathways, okay? So let me kind of scoot these off to the side. They are very similar, but a little bit different. Let me move this over and move this over, okay? So what we have currently right now on a smaller time frame here obviously is the range, but in this context we have a relatively large move going down, okay? Now big moves like this are often looking to retest the low, which would make sense because we are actually looking for the full range rotation to still occur. So if we look at it in terms of this being the prior high, then we can use that to kind of judge the distance that we are looking for underneath this prior low. Now, as you can see, we are looking to potentially go a bit lower into some of these 667.5 levels. So it wouldn't really be too surprising to me that we find ourselves actually rotating down first. Okay, if we rotate down first, it's actually a really good thing. I would like more so to buy this thing off of the low than I would to try to buy it in the middle of the range. Okay, so if we come immediately down first, it makes life a whole hell of a lot easier, and that we can simply now look for the rotation to go back up to the upside. And in this situation, we can look for that immediate path being that 672, and let's just call it 3/4 area, basically at this prior high. Okay, now this is my preferred overall move for tomorrow's session, so hopefully you stay tuned to this part of the video, because again, this is kind of like my A+ setup, so to speak. Now, much like everything else that we mentioned before, there should be support at this base structure. And if it isn't, you should be able to see it pretty clearly, okay? You'll notice that basically the market will just collapse, continuing to rotate down lower like we mentioned earlier. And in that scenario, we are going to look to shift our game plan from buying to selling, at least in the shorter term, okay? Now, those are going to be the most of the basic variations you need to be aware of. The only other thing besides that, or these variations that we mentioned, which are a whole bunch that we talked about, is the fact that, again, this is a relatively big move down, and we could find ourselves chopping in a range, okay? Now, we're going to deal with this more or less the same way that we would want to with the bull case scenario. So if we push down and find ourselves in a range, okay, at some point, we're going to want to see the market attempt to break up higher. So let's just say we go up higher first, and then we pull back down and go lower. If we false break through the lows, then basically we're going to tackle this move exactly the same way that we would once we get down to these lows, okay? Except in this situation, instead of looking for that return to go all the way back up to 672, we would have a little bit less dramatic frame of mind, okay? Because in this situation, let's just assume the range would be somewhere like so, okay? Now that's going to be the range. Again, we are still expecting it to rotate lower, but this kind of governs its movement, okay? So if we are lucky enough to find ourselves at this low right here, we would look for the market to rotate still back up. And because we're going against momentum, we will need 2 specific tries. And then we can now look to rotate back up based on the range, okay? Now in this particular situation, the range, like using this as an exact reference, it would be more so counterproductive that we would try to go for some of these highs here at 671 first before expecting the market to essentially continue its way to the upside, hitting some of those levels that we mentioned at the top of 672 and a half, okay? So just be aware that this is kind of like an alternative path that's very much so similar to what we just talked about in terms of that rotation going down first and then bouncing back up, okay? Now, again, in this range scenario, just like anything else, if we do see that it breaks down significantly, then we do need to change our concept of where the momentum is on the market, and we need to shift it now to being bearish, okay? So kind of the same things, just adding it on to different variations, all right? So again, my preferred overall variation would be this green case scenario here, in which we kind of just pull back to a minor degree and then look for a continuation going up higher. Other than that, we will have to see what the market will give us in tomorrow morning's session. So be sure to join me live at 9:30, where you can see me day trade in action live on tomorrow's session specifically, okay? So now that we got the majority of this stuff covered, at least for the cash market, let's segue on over to the futures market, okay? See if we can see anything different and ultimately kind of get us ready for a different mindset. Now, before I go too deep into the futures chart, I do want to mention something really briefly, and that's going to be the news, okay? So let's go over really quickly to the Discord, which are the links down below, and you'll be able to see me day trade live. You can ask questions, you'll be able to hear, and you'll be able to see it in real time, okay? Now, with that being said, the major news events for tomorrow, specifically on the 8th, on the 8th, is going to be the FOMC meetings minutes. So it's going to be kind of a weird situation where the majority of the day is going to be in flux. So if I can reference anything for tomorrow specifically, I would say try to get into the trades early and then let the market kind of do its thing in the afternoon, and then you can come back on Thursday for what should be a pretty easy day, or at least a little bit easier than maybe tomorrow will be. Okay, so early in on the trades, and then let the day kind of play itself out. Now you can hold trades obviously through FOMC if you're already still in something, but chances are you definitely don't want to trade around that news event. Okay, so with that being said, everyone, let's finish the video off by talking about the futures chart. Now it should be very similar to that of what we just mentioned here, but albeit maybe a little bit different. Okay, now right off the bat you can see here, let's just get rid of everything. And again, if you want to see how we traded today, which we made over 3 grand, then simply look down below for the live stream, and you'll be able to see the review. Okay, now in this situation, what I see a little bit better or clearer is the fact that this is definitely a range right here. Okay, now this is going to be the range right here. Then we need to copy and paste this thing so we can get deviations above and below, so we can ultimately see exactly where support and resistance resides. So if this is the key concept, you can see that we have pretty decent level of support above, basically conceptualizing the fact that this is a range in the formation of happening. Okay, now at this lower level, that's going to be support, and then the above level is going to be resistance. Okay, now because the momentum is bearish overall, we would be expecting, just like we mentioned earlier on in my preferred scenario, that we're actually going to be looking for this thing to break back down to the lows. Okay, now in this preferred scenario, we would expect the full distance above this range, which is pretty well identified, I think, to be the distance underneath. Okay, so in this situation, you should expect the market to at the very least try to rotate back down to 6744 and a quarter before making its mind up on what it wants to do next. Okay, now like we mentioned earlier on as well, if the market does just break down and doesn't stop, and you just notice that it keeps going lower and lower, and we open up way down at 67.27, then we do need to change our game plan, at least shorter term, to be bearish, in which we will sell the market back down to whatever that prior low happens to be. Okay, other than that, though, I would expect the market to try to recover based on the fact that this is a range. It is a bearish range, so again, you will need 2 clear attempts before getting in, and then simply look for that rotation now to go back above. Okay, now this is again the preferred scenario for tomorrow, given the fact that the market is overall bullish in its nature. The only thing that can happen basically after this, again, is a continuation back down, which would be the significant fact that this is a range. And other than that, we could break out, which is definitely possible given the fact that the market is bullish. Okay, so just be aware that if, same scenario down below, if we break out with extreme vigor and you notice that this thing just breaks out like so, then future pullbacks can now be bought to retest prior highs. Okay, so that's basically how I'm looking at the market for tomorrow. So be sure to join me, obviously, at 9:30, where we will have a live stream where you can see me day trade live. However, if you want the game plan before the bell opens at 8:30 a.m., I start the live stream for the Discord/Patreon, so you'll be able to hear me and have the game plan all set and sound before the market even starts to open and we start to trade. Okay, so again, everyone, if this video has helped you at least make a little bit better mindset of what the framework of day trading looks like, then simply like and subscribe. Excuse me. It does me a ton of great things with the YouTube algorithm. All right. Now, besides that, everyone, hopefully I will see you all bright and early tomorrow morning, either in the Discord/Patreon or here on YouTube for the live stream.
That's it for today's breakdown. Just a reminder, I trade full-time, and I only focus on the S&P 500. My strategy works across the board, but the SP 500 is where I live every single day. I stream live every morning starting at 9:20 with a free pre-market prep at 9 o'clock right here on YouTube. Then at 6 p.m, I'm back on for the daily review and game plan for tomorrow, plus I cover tickers you guys request using the exact same system. So if you want to stay consistent, hit subscribe, drop your stock in the comments, and come hang out with me live. Links for the Discord and Patreon are below if you want my full daily levels and plans. See you in the next one.
All right, everyone. So this is going to be the trade of the week, or the trade that I will show you for the week, and it happened today on October the 6th. Okay, so let me get my big face out of the way so you can see the chart here. All right, so what we have here overall, was kind of a unique situation because we were expecting a whole bunch of different things. And ultimately what we ended up getting was a potential range rotation as well as just a continuation off of the bigger move, okay? So that being said, the low of this was kind of a unique entry, okay? This is a gore pattern to the T. And with this, you can see it's more of a cascading, rising, higher high, and which gives us a nice entry off the base of this channel, okay? Now, that being said, the entry was a bit robust and big, leaving me to not be able to enter in ideally above the candle. So I ended up having to actually place my entry underneath based on the correct entry level, okay? That's what you're basically seeing right now. So with that being said, as soon as market action pulled back some, I do believe we entered in right here. Yes. So with us entering in right here, now we're going to use our volatility based algo that you will get as a tier 3 member. And this will basically allow you to understand where to put your stop loss based on the day's volatility. So with that being said, as I adjust this, I'm going to fast forward just a bit so this doesn't take all day. But as you can see, we have our stop loss now there at the lows, which is equal to our stop loss at the highs coincidentally. And then we use other levels objectively above to get our second and third targets, okay? As you can see here, after we did pull back and kind of danced around a bit, we ultimately ended up, if I continue to fast forward this, you can see in just a second, we did get our first target, and we did get our second target right here. Oh, excuse me, right in a second. We did move our stop loss up because we got our first target. Sorry about that. Then we got our second target right there. And now it's just a matter of are we going to get our last target? So there is a rhyme and reason to how we kind of trail, just so you know. But in this instance, as you can see, as we steady started to creep up dramatically closer to our target, we essentially maintained our stop loss closer as well. So as it continued to push up, we continue to push up as well. There is a trade secret for this, so don't fret. When you do become a member, you'll learn this. But in general, it just allows us to stay in as best we can, okay? So as you can see, our target was up there. We adjusted accordingly, and we did end up getting stopped out before the target high, although I did adjust the target high just a bit. So we ended up getting pretty much all the move, okay? So that being said, everyone, this was the trade of the week that you'll be seeing pretty much in all the videos for today or for this week. And if you don't want to miss opportunities just like this, then simply look down below for the description so you can get access to the Discord/Patreon, okay? Thanks for watching. See you on the next candle.